Well, one of the best SEC postgame shows, probably the best one, is on the SEC Network. And Chris Doering, former Gator wide receiver and very good player about 20 years ago, is on there, and with Dari Noka and Gene Chiswick, and he had something very interesting to say Saturday night. Georgia and the Gators didn't play this weekend, but Florida comes into this thing 4-3, 2 touchdown or so dog, maybe a little bit more. It's tough down there at Florida right now. And this is what Chris Doering had to say. He said there's a lot of negativity around the program right now. Florida's defensive line, I don't know why he just said this. Florida's defensive line has got to get has got to get better. And then he went on to say that they don't have NFL-like players that are kind of high draft picks on the defensive line right now. Well, that's not stunning. I mean, Todd Grantham is not really a great recruiter. He's very good for recruiting edge guys. He's not really a wholesale great recruiter. That's not what he does. But he does a hell of a job recruiting edge guys. That doesn't really do you much good if you're getting run on the whole time. Chris Doering doesn't say stuff like that without there being truth to it. Former players have insight in the program, particularly when the coach that they played for isn't there anymore. They're even more. I don't want to say flippant. They're even more open about their comments and their view of the world. And Chris Doering. It's been a long time since Steve Spurrier was the head coach of the Gators, and for Chris Doering, he can see, like all of us can. Florida right now is not in a good place, and this romantic notion that Georgia would go down there and get upset by the Gators. I mean, that's not really reality based. Could it happen? Yeah, but I mean, like, that's just not something that is realistic to talk about. It would have to happen before you even said anything. And a close loss doesn't do you any good if you're the Gators either. This game feels a lot like 2017. Now, it might not be 21-0 before the first quarter. I don't think that's what's going to happen. And it might not be a total blowout. But envisioning something other than a Georgia win is hard for me to picture. I mean, I watched the Gators a lot, probably the second or third most team that I watched play, and they're just inconsistent this year. They've been better on defense, but the quarterbacks are an issue. Maybe Anthony Richardson has an unbelievable game against Georgia. But based on what he's been this year, that's hard to believe. And I think even more so, just around Florida's program, there's an annoyance that's there right now. Folks are aggravated that Dan Mullen hasn't made a decision about playing Richardson. I mean, Richardson's only had one game where he's attempted almost 20 passes. That was against LSU. It was 10 for 19 for 167 yards. Had 3 touchdowns with 2 interceptions. And I don't think anybody would confuse Georgia's defense with LSU's. All of the other statistics for Richardson are nominal at best. 4 of 6, 1 of 1, 3 of 3, 3 of 8. He certainly can run. I mean, he almost has as many rushing yards as he does passing. But I would say that's not great because it's an indicator that you're having a harder time throwing than it is you're running. We know the guy can run. But the negativity is not just from the quarterbacks. It's from, going down to LSU and, playing a game you should win. I mean, they were a significant favorite in that game, and they lost on the road. Ed Orgeron dying on the vine. You got Max Johnson flinging the ball all over the place. It just didn't make any sense. There's too many strange things that have happened these last however many games for the Gators, and it's just not been good enough. And let me turn the air off real quick. It's gotten abnormally hot here these days. But I just think that the heat's really on at Florida right now because they thought they had their guy in Dan Mullen. And now you've got guys like Chris Doering who have been around the block more than a few times and tell the truth. I mean, these guys on SEC Network, they're not like their post games aren't fluff. They give it to you straight. It's worth watching. College football final, yeah, that can be a little bit of a circus. But these guys actually watch the games. They watch all the SEC games, insofar as I can tell. They give you detail you don't get elsewhere. But Florida's been too up and down, and now they're seeing Georgia ascend to the number one position in the country. They look like they're on the path to win the conference. They look like they're on the path to go to the playoff. They look like they're the best team in the country and very well could win the national championship. And that's rattling Florida. Inside the program, I think some of this has to do with, the quarterback situation. Now you go to LSU and the defense, which has played, generally speaking, relatively well the entire year. And then they don't play well at LSU, allowing 50 points, 49 against LSU in a game that, again, they just can't lose. So when he says, that there's a lot of negativity around the program right now, he's talking boosters, he's talking the kids, he's talking everything in Gainesville, and this is not the week for there to be, quote, a lot of negativity around the program right now. There's only been 2 upsets in the last 30 years since 1990 in this rivalry. And this is a legit rivalry. This isn't like Georgia-Kentucky or Georgia-South Carolina or even Georgia-Tennessee. This is a rivalry. If the game doesn't have a name, it's not a rivalry at Georgia, okay? So, clean old-fashioned hate, Deep South's oldest rivalry, and then the cocktail party. If it's not that, it's just a big game. It ain't a rivalry. You can comment below, but it's what it is. And you don't want this game to be the game where you're trying to gussy everything up and do a big explosion of points and all that stuff. But these two teams, in the 90s, obviously, Florida dominated, winning all but one game. In the 2000s, Florida continued playing well, just wasn't as dominant, but pretty dominant still. And then in the 2010s, Georgia won the decade. So in those 30 years, there have been 2 times where a double-digit dog won the game straight up. That was in 2014 with Will Muschamp and Jeremy Pruitt. I mentioned those two because Will was smart enough to not bother to throw the ball, and Jeremy was dumb enough to not be able to stop the run the entire night. That was the most rushing yards Georgia gave up that entire decade. And they played Georgia Tech with Paul Johnson, okay? That night against Florida was a reason to fire Jeremy Pruitt, period. In 1997, Georgia went down there as a 19-point dog and won by 20 or 21, whatever. It was a beating. But, most of the time, if you're a double-digit dog in this game, you're going to lose. And this Georgia team doesn't have Hudson Mason as the quarterback. This Florida team, unfortunately, is juggling quarterbacks just the same way because of performance, just the same way they did in 1997. They played 3 guys in that game, and it just wasn't there for the Gators that night, and Georgia ran all through them. Turnovers here, Robert Edwards there, Hines Ward blocking 6 people. Kirby, I think, had 2 interceptions that night. Georgia was ready to play, had a big lead with Hines, had a big play to start the game with Hines Ward, and they just took it from there. I think Florida got up. Maybe Florida got up 14-10 or 17-14, whatever it was. And Georgia had to come back in the third quarter to win that game, and they did. That was a tough bunch of guys. Robert, Kirby, Hines Ward, Mike Bobo, almost forgot, Corey Allen, people like that. That was an older team. Those two stand as the only time that a double-digit dog has won this game. And in the 80s, I don't think a double-digit dog won this game. Now, 80s betting lines aren't quite as obvious and available as those from the 90s and the 2000s, but mainly those were tight games. In 85, when Georgia upset the Gators, I don't think they were a massive, massive favorite, Florida, to win that game. They were favored because they were the number 1 team in the country, but they weren't a massive favorite. Chris Doering doesn't just make stuff up, and it's coming from his heart. It hurts him to say that. There's a lot of negativity around the program right now. I'm afraid he's right. We'll just see what happens on Saturday. We'll see you over on the website.